Architect Divya Chakravarti. She completed her undergraduate studies from SRM University and she went on to pursue her master's in historic preservation and urbanism and study of the built environment from the University of California, Los Angeles. She went on to work for the Department of Planning and Preservation for the city of Pasadena, California. She also did a brief stint of work for Historic Scotland, Edinburgh, UK. She also worked on conservation projects like Kalsa Mahal, Gokhale Hall in Chennai, and Marimalappa Educational Trust in Mysore. She is currently working as a director of Samrakshan Heritage Consultancy. She is also a co-founder of the Artisan Reprisal of Traditional Materials, Method and Technology. She goes on to conduct workshops to revive traditional and lost methods of construction.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series for the Bachelors of Architecture. The subject we'll be dealing with is architectural conservation, and the topic we shall be looking into is urban conservation. The subtopics we'll be discussing in this unit are an overview of urban history of India and Tamil Nadu, understanding the character and issues of historic cities. We'll be discussing the case study of a temple town, Srirangam, finding out more about historic districts or historic precincts. Urban history of India. What exactly is urban history? Urban history is a field of history that actually deals with the historical nature of cities and towns and the process of urbanization. This approach is usually multidisciplinary. It's not sufficient if you just have a particular science involved in it. It needs to discuss social history, architectural history, urban sociology, urban geography, trade history and archaeology. Urbanization and industrialization were popular themes for 20th century historians, and these are often tied to an implicit model of modernization or the transformation of rural traditional societies. The history of urbanization focuses on the processes by which existing populations can concentrate themselves in urban localities over a period of time so that political, social, cultural and economic contexts of cities are formed. Most urban scholars focus on the word metropolis, which is nothing but a special important city like Delhi or Calcutta or Mumbai or Chennai. Very rarely attention is actually paid to B centers or B towns, what we are referred to as, which are towns like Trichy, Tanjavur, Madurai, Nagpur. So, however, social historians do find these small cities easier to deal with because they can actually get the census data in an easier way because of the smaller geographical area and lesser population to be dealt with. What exactly is urban biography? Urban biography is the narrative history of a city, often which reaches a general audience. Urban biographies cover the interrelationships amongst various dimensions such as politics, the demography, that is the kind of people that live in that particular town, the kind of businesses that occur there, what kind of culture exists over there, what is the popular culture, kind of religion, what kind of ethnic groups of people are there, housing and neighborhoods. It covers municipal governments as well as physical expansion, growth as well as decline. If you look at any city or town in history, there is a time where it is born, there is a period where it grows steadily, and there is a sense of decline that emerges finally. Historians often focus on the largest and the most dominant city, usually the national capital, which geographers refer to as a primate city. Urbanization forms an important branch of historical studies. Though extensive work has actually been done in the West, in India this has not been the case. Till about the time of independence, we have not even thought of what exactly is urban planning or what is urban history. Although no systematic research has been done on this subject from an academic point of view, it has been there in terms of through literature and other studies which have been happening in our country. The government post-independence has conducted a lot of socio-economic studies in selected cities to understand the problems that occur there, especially due to rapid urbanization. Although during the past few decades, some extremely important studies have been undertaken which helps us actually understand the socio-economic balance and history of modern India. In a broader perspective, very little research has yet been done because urbanization as such has not been dealt with in the way it is dealt in the West from a historical viewpoint. Urbanization is definitely a worldwide phenomenon in the 20th century. Of course, this does not mean urbanization did not occur earlier parts of history. It has actually been a very important part of ancient and medieval times. In history, humans have always had a tendency to move from less advanced parts of society to a more advanced part of society. What man usually searches for is a better way of living, a better standard of living. So if there is a place that exists that can offer it to him and his family, he is definitely going to move. And that is the beginning of urbanization. What happened before the Industrial Revolution was the factors that influenced urbanization was different. It was religion, it was agriculture, it was a style of living. Post-industrialization, that is the 19th and 20th century, the kind of urbanization that has emerged is because of industries and the kind of industries that are developing in the urban center. To cater to the needs of an industrial society, many people have flocked to towns and worked in different factories, especially creating something like slum areas. With the growth of industries, simultaneous development has happened in administration and education. Because of new fields coming into place, new typologies of building emerged. Necessities came for big administrative buildings, courts, and even cinema halls for recreation became essential for the physical growth of towns. In modern India, urbanization was facilitated by the British government. The East India Company selected few handful of cities that had both commercial and strategic importance. Since the beginning of trade, they chose these cities because they were close to the sea, because at that point of time, trade was usually only through the ships and sea routes. The cities that developed obviously were Calcutta, Madras and Bombay. There are various grounds which facilitate urbanization. You have the administrative center, the religious center, the market center, and finally the cultural center. It's these factors that actually enable a town to be urbanized or increase the process of migration from smaller towns or villages. Now we'll be delving into particularly the urban history of Tamil Nadu. What we are trying to focus in this part of the unit is, let's learn what kind of urban history happened within Tamil Nadu right from the medieval times to the current period. So the major factors which happened are, you have emergence of ports. Like we just discussed, the Britishers actually settled into places where sea route was very important, and as the Britishers came in, the Dutch came in, the necessity for military posts became important, and as military and trade was happening, markets emerged. For protection, forts emerged, and to take care of all these elements, administration was required, and manufacturing and industry was happening, and India as such has a very strong history in religion. But along with the Britishers and other foreign traders that came in, we started having even Christian missionary activities. So we'll be looking into all of these elements. Historically, urban centers have always played a very important role, especially when you look at economic, political, cultural and military activities. The cities situated in strategic spots have natural linkages with the near and far off hinterland. So where you need human as well as natural material resources. They offer natural facilities for the growth of defense, commerce and civilization. Urban history in Tamil Nadu has a very rich past. Most of the research on medieval Tamil Nadu has concerned itself with agrarian structures, that is, buildings related to agriculture, peasant settlements and general pattern of socio-economic changes. Problems of interpretation of records and the inadequacy of statistical data have deterred scholars from reconstructing the history of urban centers despite their interest in trade patterns. Because of lack of documentation, people have not been able to study this phenomenon better. However, with the dependable framework of agrarian development has now provided during recent studies, it has been possible, and as well as it's important that we venture into this urban history, because it's only if we venture into this urban history we'll be able to learn what was the thought behind these centers being established and where exactly are these towns heading to in the future. As far as urban process in medieval Tamil Nadu is talked about, we have three important phases. The first phase is during the Sangam period, the second with the period of the Cholas from the 9th to the 13th century, and the third phase you have two parts, one within the Cholas as well from the 14th to the 19th century, and second phase is which includes the Muslims, the Nayakars, the Marathas and the European settlements which happened during the East India Trading Company, which provides actually a large scale agrarian expansion, trade and commercial activities, industrial developments, craft and institutional organization. All of these began to serve as the basis for the growth of urban centers in various districts of Tamil Nadu. The most crucial factor in the process of urbanization was the maritime trade, because like we described just now, sea routes and maritime trade was the main crux of the transportation department. There was no other way of transporting it. It was only later on railways came into being and roadways came into being. So these were extensively used even by the great Cholas in the coastal territories like that of Tanjavur. Emerging from the main rice producing region of this Kaveri Delta, the Cholas controlled vast tracts of agricultural land in this fertile river valley. All this evidence we get only from literary descriptions of fortified cities, coastal towns with several quarters for merchants and other social groups. So which all we learn from that it was quite sophisticated, the kind of urban development. There was segregation between communities, there was segregation between work and leisure. Our archaeological evidence is very less, and what little we have unearthed was in Kaveri Pupattinam in Tanjavur and Urayur in Tiruchirappalli district. So besides all of these, it's only the rich literary descriptions that we have to fall back on. Many factors can be attributed to medieval urban centers in Tanjavur district of Tamil Nadu. You have the holding of fairs, the emergence of religious centers, commercial activities centered around inland ports, urban status on rural settlements, initiatives taken by kings and ministers in the creation of urban centers. So combination of the king and religion played a very important role. And besides these two factors, trade and trade related agriculture was very crucial as well. There were some other factors also responsible for urban centers in Tanjavur district. Number one, the geographical location, which is most important. It makes it a point of convergence of all major routes which pass through this region. Second, trade, which however to begin with was only incidental in the process of urbanization. Importance as a center for political and administrative activities. Once the king develops as well as the kingdom develops with economic activities, it becomes a seat of political and administrative power as well. Religious importance happens because at that point of time, kings put their stamp as their kingdom by building huge temples, and the same happened with Tanjavur with the construction of the Brihadishwara temple, which was a very famous Shiva temple. The most dominant and crucial factor for urban center has always been the geographical system of an area. So when you talk of a geographical system, you're talking about rainfall, how fertile is the land, what kind of agricultural land is there a river nearby, is there natural irrigation, or is it going to be dependent on rain completely. So all these factors are also very important. It should however be emphasized that in medieval times, hardly any town performed a single function. They were simultaneously performing the activities of administration, religion, market and a center of culture. Now, what kind of urban centers emerged? Urban centers can be classified under various categories on the basis of port towns, trade routes, fort towns, administrative towns, military towns, market centers, religious and cultural centers. We will be looking into what are the kind of factors that are influencing the formation of these urban centers. So, the main factors, like we mentioned, activities of the king, trade, places of worship, village assemblies, agriculture. The possible supplementary factors, these were the main factors that we saw. The supplementary factors are food supply, what kind of food is available over there, what kind of crops are grown in that area, craft specialization. If there are houses being built, what kind of work can I do? If a king is building a particular type of temple or a structure, there will be stonemasons who move in there. And at that point of time, when a temple was being constructed, it was constructed over a long period of time. It was not over a few years. So, an entire generation of family would be involved in it. Special stratification, administration, warfare and defense, and the population. All towns depend on certain external forces like non-urban population supplying food, materials, and in turn consuming the goods and services that are provided by the town. So, a symbiotic relationship emerged between the village and the town. And as the town grows, population also increases. The increase in population was obviously due to migration. People from villages and smaller towns started moving towards larger towns and cities. And as this town grows, obviously the change and need for migration is mostly economic, because like we have already discussed, man always wants to move to a better place which offers him and his family better opportunities and standard of living. So, how did market towns come into being? The market played an important role in the crystallization of towns. In a sense, it can be suggested that urban economy was sustained by the trade. This you can actually see by the power and prestige of the mercantile community. The communities which emerged were the Chettiars, the Marakayars, the Mudalayars, and so many other communities that emerged in this area of around Tanjavur. The agricultural developments and proliferation of new urban settlements were the causes for market networks. So, when one important town emerged, small satellite towns which will support this main important town emerged. So, market networks were created automatically. Most of these micro-region administration divisions had one or two trade centers. So, for example, Nagapatnam had Paravai and Velipalayam as marketing centers. So, when Nagapatnam emerged as a port town, all Paravai and Velipalayam started off as market towns to actually trade on the products that were brought in from other parts of the country or world. Ports actually play a very important role in the economy of a country, and market towns and port towns coexist together in a way. So, now we will see how port towns actually emerged. From time immemorial, Tanjavur has actually been enjoying very good port activities because of the natural coastline that it has. So, this has a lot of important ports in the Tanjavur district since the Sangam period. Ports undoubtedly represent potential centers of urban growth. You can actually see how well developed a place is if it is by the coast at that point of time. During medieval times, coastal trade was mainly in food grains, firewood, cattle transportation and bulk commodities from coastal areas. Another important port town that came into being is Tranquebar, or what is known as Taragambadi. At that point of time, it was a Danish settlement in the Coromandel coast. It was bought in by the Danes from the Raghunatha Nayakar in 1612, and they bought 16 other villages like this from the Maratha kings, and this settlement marked the beginning of the first Protestant missionary in South India. So, till now, as Hinduism was the main religion, Taragambadi became the first Christian Protestant missionary in South. The port that was more visible in our period, you have Tranquebar, Karaikal, Nagaur, Nagapattinam, and these are all by Danish, French and Portuguese settlements. And by the beginning of the 17th century, Nagapattinam actually became so important, it actually got international recognition as a port town. Now, simultaneously, what was happening is, when trade is happening, we mentioned, as Indians and Indian history happens, worship and religion always plays an important role. So, devotional or bhakti worship was one of the most important cultural developments of this period, and a result of that is the temple that was constructed and the temple center that emerged. In South India at that point of time, in the Chola period and the Sangam period, no temple was built as an aloof structure. An entire town emerged around the temple, entire community settled around the temple. So, many cities or towns have grown around such temples, and we will be looking at one such temple town in the case study following this. So, people from a long time in history have had a mutual attraction to temples and natural surroundings. So, spirituality and morality have been in our body for a very long time. It is not something that can be removed. So, religion and social, they interact well with people at this time. Temples actually provided even an institutional base, because they started learning, having Veda schools and things related to that. So, socio-economic differences were happening, political integration was happening because kings got together in the name of religion, and great significance from the time of Bhakti movement. This all started around 7th century. Some of these Bhakti centers, you have a lot of these areas that emerged. You have Tanjore district, Trichy district, Kumbakonam, all of these places emerged because of the Bhakti movement, and they emerged as religious and pilgrimage centers, which not only made them grow as urban complexes, but also gave a lot of trade activities to that local area. So, if you think of what kind of temples grew around and how temples affected urbanism, it is not only religion that plays an important role. Religion is only one factor that gives rise. The other factors are dependent on religion and the kind of people that come in to visit the temple. You have something called floating population, and in those days, people, when a town or became famous for a particular religion, people would actually decide to settle down in that area. So, you had migratory population, and it became a place of pilgrimage, which meant people would visit and then leave as well. So, the new concept of travel came into being. At that point of time, when we are talking about the 7th century, 10th century, the concept of travel was pretty much not there. People would stay in where they lived, and then they would work in the same area and just finish their life in that one particular region. Now, when pilgrimage places came into being, religion started playing such an important role. People traveled to visit these temples, and population and growth of literature, growth of economics, everything was there because of this one factor. Now, we will discuss the character and issues of historic cities. The development of planning ideas applied to historic urban areas extends back to the 19th century. So, we have lots of concepts regarding planning in historic cities which are yet to be completely understood and applied as well. Now, urban conservation was born out of disorientation and dismay. There was an irreversible loss of monuments that actually happened in the 1800s in France, and the very first person to protest for this is Victor Hugo, who actually said, why do you have to destroy old monuments or old buildings in the name of growth and urbanization? Following this, you have an Austrian architect, Camillo Sitte, who was a planner, and he actually made a lot of studies even with respect to India, where he actually evaluated that ancient and medieval urban heritage has a lot of value and it needs to be preserved. And all this happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Sitte actually even discussed about how an historic city can provide continuity in a urban format. Yes, a city has to develop, it has to embrace new technology, everything, but at what cost is all that happening? Isn't it better for a city to grow organically and around it rather than go and demolish it and start away again from scratch? And that is what he brought about. He wanted us to understand the danger of urban renewal. When you talk of urban renewal, as the word suggests, it is renew. We will remove what is there and we will reconstruct from scratch, which was a very bad idea at that point of time. In his plan for the city of Madurai, he advised against demolitions, against reconfiguring and sanitizing neighborhoods. Instead, he opted for something that is called conservative surgery, where you improve all the conditions, you improve housing conditions, you improve the sanitation levels, you improve the standard of living, but with minimal interventions as well as expense. A giant step forward in this movement was attributed to Giovanni, and this happened in the later part after Cite came into being. What he brought in as a concept was, let's enlarge the concept of a monument. At that point of time, everyone knew how important a monument is. Why don't we apply the same concept to a historic city? He introduced the concept of vernacular architecture, which is architecture that is prevalent to that particular local area and which is not only an integral part of that urban fabric, but is also very much worthy of conservation. He also was the first to recognize that historic cities are incompatible with modern urban developments. So he actually advocated for city expansions to happen around the urban core, away from the historic core fabric, and such that motorized traffic is not allowed in the historic core but away from it only. If you actually look at this here, this is the Qutub Minar which was constructed, and this was how it was meant to be. A very scenic layout, a very beautiful layout with just few people around. And look at the Qutub Minar in 2007. It becomes so insignificant with taller building constructed with haphazard wires, and it's surrounded by all kinds of encroachments, houses and ruins. India, if you actually look at, is a place of many ancient civilizations, but none of our cities today instill any sense of pride. We have beautiful cities right from the Harappan era. We have Dholavira, and that to the 20th century Delhi and Chandigarh, but not one of these have been mentioned or designated by the World Heritage Cities, whereas in Italy there are 10 themselves. So we have actually not gone in for urban renewal. We have not thought of and destroyed any town, but because of our carelessness and inability to look after all these cities, we have gradually destroyed over the past 50 years many of our historic core fabric, and this has happened because of the politician official builder nexus. So this is like a triangle we have been stuck in, and this has been gradual and not been done in a very good civil way. So this requires better policy and preservation. And at the very end of this lecture, what is it that we have seen? The overview of urban history of India and Tamil Nadu. We have tried to understand the character and issues of historic cities. We should be able to answer the following questions. Define the terms urban history and urban biography. Discuss the three phases of urban process in medieval Tamil Nadu. What is a primate city? Thank you. That brings us to the end of this lecture.